Welcome to Happening Multicultural Festival 2022. Um, Before we go any further, I would like to take a few minutes for the land acknowledgement. I recognize that I live and work in traditional indigenous territories, and I acknowledge that I'm currently located on the traditional territory of Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and most recently, the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. I wish to express gratitude to Mother Earth for the resources we are using, and I would like to honor all the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people who have been living on the land since the time immemorial. Happening Multicultural Festival is the first and only Toronto-based festival created by community artists, giving center stage to newcomer, immigrant, and refugee artists. During Happening Poetry Nights, we celebrate poets who, among other things, identify as newcomers, refugees, or immigrants. Every Thursday in May 2022, there will be a poetry event with three readings or performances, as well as one interview. Despite the fact that poetry inhabits many geographical locations and speaks in different languages and accents, literature continues to be the most exclusive of arts and the most resistant against outsiders. My name is Bänoo, and I'm the poet curator of the series. It is now my pleasure to introduce the poets for tonight. Our first poet of tonight is Lillian Allen, poet, educator, and spoken word performer. Lillian Allen is a professor of creative writing at OCAD University, two-time JUNO Award winner and trailblazer in the field of spoken word and dub poetry. Her books include Rhythm and Hard Times, which was a Canadian bestseller, Women Do This Every Day, and Psychic Unrest. She also has some work for young people, including Why Me, If You See Truth, and Nothing But a Hero. She co-produced and directed Black We Black, a film documentary on Jamaican dub poet Muta Baruka, which premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival.
Hello there, I'm Lillian Allen, writer, poet, activist, and great to have you connecting here today. You know, the promise of poetry is that it allows you to go to a very deep place. And that's actually the job of the poet, to get in there, to barrel down beyond the surface. This is a commitment of any artist, right? We're not just reflectors of what's happening. There is a technology beneath it and a spirit and an essence that we need to gnaw at and pull out. We need to wrestle questions and reintegrate that fragmentation that society places on us. So bring our feelings, our ideas, our opinions, and explore who we fully are and what we experience, and bring them into language. And we do this from a single subjective point of view, and that is of being specific and specificity and specifically human. And that's what we share, our humanity. And with poetry and art, we have the shared yearning. Art, poetry. The poetic quality of life calls in the human spirit for art, creativity, and articulations. The biology of poetics, the shape of prose in a blind child's eye, feeding our secular and sacred need for symbols and images. Our aesthetic contemplations for the way we journey. Oh, the weight of speed, the color of time. A reminder that we must struggle fierce to unravel the unknown, fight for what we believe, what we can become, possibilities for which art prepares us for meaning, for death, for the eternal. So yeah, that's a piece for all of us actually, but most especially for the poet. And my next piece I'm reading is called Unnatural Causes. And we all know we're in the age of the Anthropocene, and a lot of what's happening in the world is not natural, even if it's manifested in natural causes like floods and forest fire and hurricanes, etc. It's been induced by, and I'll use the singular term, man, in our incessant greed for material things and domination over everything. And this is on the granular level. It's about this migration, how we travel, and what's a dream, what's a pull, and what happens when the dream gets shelved, when the promise is not the reality, which is the case for a lot of immigrants. And yeah, we are grateful. We are an indigenous land, and it's amazing that we're being here and being able to do that. But in terms of how society is organized and what it promised us for what we bring, our souls to this land, for a lot of people, it falls short. And they've made do with whatever, and taken all the opportunities. And I can just imagine if all that support was there and all the promises were allowed. Just think how amazing that would be, because I think as a community, we have done pretty well. Ooh, the wind howled and cussed. It knew no rest. When it ran free, it was a hurricane to be watched and silenced. Silence make you sit and rot. Even cactus fades against persistent drought. They hope the poor will become acclimatized. See how they look at sky rises and call them mountain peaks? See how the sun greets them first in the city, makes a rolling shadow, bong, 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 bong. Somewhere in the silvered city, hunger reels beneath the flesh, and one by one they're closing shops in the city. The epicure, the reveille on the porch, no small affair, the sequel, the petit cafe, the bamboo. The curtained metropolitan glare, that is the city, grins a diamond sparkle sunset. It cuts a dashing pose. The picture you sent on the postcard, that was wonderful. It reminded me of a fairyland where everything is so clean, a place where everyone is happy and well taken care of. But the sky, it seems so round, so huge, and so indifferent. Indifference passes through the wind that brings a new breed, breeds a new passion, the passion of inaction, the inaction of politicians, the art of avoiding issues, the issues of culture, the culture of exclusion, the exclusion of the political and the powerless. Bong, 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 bong. for whom the bell tolls bong, 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 bong. Somewhere in this our city, in our governing chambers, a watershed of indie light, of Newton niceties, anxious, anxious, click, 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 postcard perfect. Dry rivers in the valley, the thirst at the banks of plenty, a room at the streetcar shelter, a bus stop bed, a bus stop bed. You can make it through winter if you're ice. You can make it through winter if you're ice. Gone frozen on many things, beer backs, no shelter, ice hearts in the elements, impassioned as the wind. All people are created equal, except in winter. All people are created equal, except in winter. Right here on the front steps of abundance, Caroline Bungle tugs her load, stops a place, invites a little company of sleep. Unclick. That, my dear, is very on postcard-like. Not inclined to poses, posture and unlear plight, a dangle of tarot, of lost hope, an abandonment, an explorer in the Arctic of her culture, a straggler drift across her terrain of indifference, a life unravels, seeks a connection, a soul outstretched to the cosmos. Can you spare a little social change, please? A cup of tea? A place to sleep, a job, a job, a job. The last postcard you sent, it was kind of weird. Poor people sleeping at the bus stop? Surely you don't have that there. Anyways, I'm dying to come to Canada. I'm a pioneer. So that's my unnatural causes for you. Indeed. So my final piece is called Pandemic. And I wrote this piece, there's just so much happening in this piece and in the world. It's one of those, a Galliano kind of thing where you capture a whole history of the world in one little piece, right? And I wanted to mark the confluence of that just horrid, arrival of the virus and the disquietude and the rise in the Black Power movement, anti-racism movement, Black Lives Matters, when decent people stand up to fight for justice, and it became a global movement. So pandemic, one, the year 2020, life reversed the world into a pause, search the lost and found for meaning, misplaced things. Frantic, we grope in quarantine within ourselves, but not quarantine from our fears and our conscience grown thin. How can we fathom that stepping out your door or going to the supermarket to get groceries or to meet up with friends at dusk could be a death sentence? Ask any young Black man. Ask any young Black man. Two, in social isolation, we rest, become restless. The unknown looming, weighty words, lockdown, shelter in place, social distance, self-isolation, quarantine, infection count, intubate, death toll, words screaming for submission. Three, there is an enormity to the immensity of this pandemic moment, a glum, impenetrable disquietude, the Anthropocene, like worms in cottonwood. Four, we've been moving through life like it's our first fees paid by an anonymous benefactor with infinite generosity. Eyes that glitter everywhere. Five, people say, it's a sign that the greed of the world's ruling classes has gone too far, that we've given up too much of our personal values, flittering, our flitter, an accomplice to the pain of the othered. 6, now woke in from a universal drown in busy insignificance with our things, we flitter, where to put our efforts, like where to put our eyes in feelings of shame. 7, then the George Floyd murder twisted our necks, and we couldn't look away. Our flitter waited as we held our breath, didn't breathe until, in a collective gasp, we found a voice to exhale. Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter. 8. The streets became our canvas, and the silence of the internet clicked and clung till community emerged, coalesced around the horror of racism we all know gaslighted for decades. For decades. For decades. 9. Black people are harmed by the spit and spite of white folks turning away, even above systemic inequalities and white supremacy pressing on our necks. 10. The year 2020, the world changed before white folks did enough, before white folks did enough to courage up to fight against anti-Black racism. 11. We're all in this together. 12. Are we all in this together? 13. Embrace this poem. 14. Talk back to this poem with your heart. Gentle. All right, so that's me. And yeah, thank you for listening. And definitely, want you to connect and to think about what these words presents for you, what they make you think about. They make you upset, they make you guilty, they make you, and then think beyond the words. Where do they live? Where would they come from? Why would I be writing about those things? All right, poetry for the people. Poetry lives forever. Thank you. Bye.
In this section of the evening, it's time for our interview. I'm interviewing Diana Manoli. Bucharest-born Diana Manoli immigrated in 2000 and is now proudly identifying herself as an award-winning Romanian-Canadian scholar, writer, and literary translator. She holds a PhD from the University of Toronto and has been teaching at Canadian universities since 2006. In her home country, she published 9 creative writing books and earned 14 literary awards. Her recent poetry was published in English and or in translation in the UK, US, Belarus, Mexico, Brazil, South Africa, Turkey, Albania, China, France, Romania, and of course, Canada. Her 7th poetry book, Praying to a Landed Immigrant God, is forthcoming from Grey Books in Canada. Welcome to Happening Multicultural Festival 2022 Poetry Interviews. We are thrilled to have Diana Manoli with us for this interview. Diana, thank you so very much for accepting this interview invitation despite the rejection of all the other interviews in the past.
Yes, it's my first interview since I came to Canada almost 22 years ago.
Oh my God, it was time. It was time somebody interviewed you because you have so much to say, honestly, you know.
So
Thank
kind.
you. I just want to start with this to ask you to please tell us about your journey, focusing on your immigrant poet journey. If you could.
Yes. Sorry. Yeah, I want to start by thank you too for inviting me, and Muse Arts too, and for helping me break the ice. Maybe from now on I will agree to other interviews. It's a journey which has challenges and which has a lot of joy, and it was interesting. So back home, we have a saying, Romanians are born poets. And I think it applies to me because I started writing poetry when I was 12 and I never stopped. I think it's my survival strategy. You know, after a busy day, or a stressful day, instead of having a glass of wine to unwind, many times I just write a poem. So when I came to Canada, I already had published 6 books in Romania. I had won 13 literary awards. I was spoiled. And I was naive. I thought it would be easy for me to get my work published in Canada. And it didn't happen. And I will talk about this a little later. Now, because I landed in Ottawa, where my sister's family still is, I went to chapters, looked at the Canadian magazines, and I submitted my work to Arc magazine because it was in Ottawa, and to Room magazine from Vancouver because it was a women's magazine, and I was a woman writing about women. Of course, I was rejected, and not just that. Almost 22 years after, I still didn't get my work, my poems published in neither Arc magazine nor Room magazine in Vancouver. So I am still working on that, and I am determined. I am still submitting every time they have a submission call out.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing this, because sometimes we might think as newcomers, the same as all of us have had that moment of newcomerness. So but you know, it's marvelous. Thank you. I want to ask you another question, Diana. Nowadays we talk a lot about identities and, you know, marginalized identities, people of color, indigenous, Black people. And we also know that immigrants can also fall into all of these identities, right? Immigrants can be LGBT, they can be people of color, as well as being immigrants. So I would like to ask you a specific question about that. Do you see any similarities between immigrants and other people that have the same identities with them?
Like intersectional identity.
Yes.
Yeah, I have thought about this a lot. And I have also written about this in my scholarship. And I think it's a great question. Thank you very much for that. I would say that immigrants also share with other minority groups the insider-outsider status. Sometimes I am thinking of this as if we are like internal exiles, because a lot of times we are clustered in something like often feels like a ghetto. And the reason I say this is because we have hybrid identities, and like minorities, not just intersectional identities, and because we do not take things for granted. Coming from, that's why I would call us all insider outsiders in relationship to mainstream Canada and in relationship to the majority of Canadians. In addition to that, a lot of us came here from countries where where all people experience discrimination. And so I would say we have a trained eye to be more observant of any kind of discrimination, to notice them. In addition to that, and probably I will keep adding additions to this, we fought, a lot of us have fought in our home countries against discrimination of any kind. I mean, I grew up in communist Romania, and I've been fighting for my freedom of speech since I was a teenager, including through my poetry. And I know you came from Iran as a political refugee, and you've been doing the same in your country, and you've been you continue doing that in Canada. Now, another point I would like to make is that, in my personal view, immigrants are more open to change. We fought for change in our home countries, and we, on a personal level, we dared to change everything in our lives. We uprooted ourselves and came to another country where we had, and we still have, to redefine ourselves, to acknowledge what I perceive as an ongoing hybridization, because right now I am neither a Romanian nor a Canadian. I am a proudly hyphenated Romanian Canadian. And I would like to add something more, if I may.
Of course.
Yeah.
This is a very interesting discussion.
Thank you, Bänoo.
Yeah.
We have experienced, some of us, if not most of us, experience discrimination back home. But often case we'd experience different kinds of discrimination. So my problem in a communist dictatorship, my main problem in a communist dictatorship was with freedom of speech. Until I came to Canada, it never crossed my mind that men and women weren't equal. I discovered that gender equality hasn't not yet been achieved after I came to Canada, and I do fight for that. And people call me a feminist. I might be a feminist. I don't know. I am. There is no word. I just believe in equality. More than
well,
that,
that's the definition of a feminist, right?
Yeah, you might be right. I might be a feminist. Now, on top of that, histories are different. So I was naive again. I didn't know coming to Canada that I would have to swear allegiance to the British Queen, because I didn't do my homework. And more than that, I had no idea, because that's not, it wasn't in the news 22 years ago, and it was still about deeply buried truths. I had no idea about the colonial history of Indigenous people, and I had no idea about the legacy of slavery in Canada. So basically, I was shocked when I realized all things, and I had written about those things as a poet, and when I had to negotiate the very, very difficult line or distinction between activist poetry and cultural appropriation, which complicated my life even more. So eventually, I think I settled, in quotation marks, to support these two main discriminated groups in Canada, Indigenous people and African Canadians, as a professor. So I made it my moral duty to include Indigenous works and African Canadian works in my courses since 2008. And I'm very proud to say that I have been doing that, like opening the Canadian literature canon to BIPOC writers, while most of the syllabi at that time still focused on American writers, not even on Canadian writers. And also, because, you know, this is the great distinction Indigenous people make to work with Indigenous people, not on Indigenous people, and my scholarship is not about that. So all the writers I have invited to visit my classes, I'm very happy to say that they are BIPOC writers or minority writers. In the fall at McMaster, I taught Canadian fiction, including a few Indigenous novels, and culture and performance. The two guest speakers I was able to bring to meet my students were Indigenous writers Joshua Whitehead and the amazing performance artist Monique Mojica. At
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. I'm gonna this is all very fascinating. I know what you do in your academic work. I just want to bring you back. I think when I asked you the question about the similarities between immigrants and other minorities, you also kind of verged into some differences as well, right? But if you want to talk about the differences, this is also another aspect that we need to talk about. Having the same intersectional identities, what makes immigrants different from other marginalized people, if we might put it that way?
Well, I will start from something everybody who might watch this interview can hear: language, accent. We do not have a Canadian accent, neither in French nor in English. And I would say this makes us even more vulnerable to discrimination, to slurs, to things like go back where you came from. Like a Black writer who is also an immigrant is not just a visible minority, it's also an audible minority, how I called it in my scholarship. And that puts those kind of people in a more difficult position in relationship to Canadians with a Canadian accent. In addition to that, we have different education. We grew up with usually with a different literary canon. So often we challenge the so-called Western canon in English language poetry, which makes it much harder for us to establish, to get our work published before establishing ourselves.
Great. Yes, this is all true. And I was actually thinking about that. I was thinking that, well, especially focusing on immigrant writers and poets, right, as opposed to other artists, like a visual artist or a dance artist, you know, their accent isn't as prominent as our accent is in our work, in our field of work. So,
well,
right?
the actors have it worse.
Yes, yeah.
I can tell you that for a fact.
But you know, I know some immigrant poets who actually were reluctant to go up on a stage and share their work in their own voice. They gave their poem to other people to read because they wanted their accent to be hidden. And that's one of the issues that we have. So you mentioned so many things, and I think that you addressed a lot of questions. But I would like to ask you. I guess you talked about this a lot, but in a more focused way. How do you describe the literary scene, the publishing world, for a newcomer artist or poet or writer?
Well, that's one of the shared challenges poets have, and I would say they have it all over the world, because rarely a poetry book sells at the most a few hundred copies, sometimes less than 100 copies. Publishers don't make money publishing poetry. Poets don't make money publishing poetry. And that makes it very, very difficult. Now, I did Google it. In Canada, in 2019, were sold 251,354 books of poetry. This might sound a lot, but we are over 30 million people here. And the sales only represent 1.9% of the sales of nonfiction books. So the market is very, very small. There are very few literary magazines in Canada compared to the United States, for example, and they are literally overwhelmed by submissions. In one of my rejections, I read that they received 300 poems and they could only publish 12. So it's very difficult to publish poetry in any case, but we also, I think, as immigrant poets, we have specific challenges. To go back to my previous point on how we are more sensitive to discrimination and oppression as insiders, outsiders, I would say that a lot of us address socio-political issues in our work. And in my experience, this scares publishers and magazines away. I had an editor, I will keep it private, I will keep his name private, but I was told that my poetry was considered too political by the magazine board. And my first collection of poems written entirely in English, which is called Guilty Until Proven Innocent, has been rejected by all 9 Canadian publishing houses that accepted submissions in 2020, in March. All of them. It is called, I told you how it's called, and it does deal with discrimination and oppression. I was lucky that my bilingual English-Romanian book, which also has an interesting title, Praying to a Landed Immigrant God, that book was accepted, and I was like, so happy by Great Borders Books. Unfortunately, COVID put a stop on that publication, and I am still hoping it will come out in print eventually.
Yeah, we hope so too. I think you have, like, your poetry is brilliant, but as you mentioned, this is I feel the same way. I feel that North Americans are not as open to political poetry or poetry with social justice themes, and that's one of the other issues that we are facing. So now that we are here, Diana, what do you, how do you, if there is a newcomer, an immigrant, poet, do you have any advice, any suggestions, any recommendations for so-called success?
I have a list. I made a list, a mental list, and
Great.
I have a list. And this is just from my personal experience, and I cannot provide recipes for success because I don't think there is such a thing. But I would start from something which I feel is very important. I think an immigrant should start by immigrants should start by telling their own stories in their work. Because in my experience, again, I noticed that Canadian readers are really interested in reading about other people, especially when those life experiences come from afar. Because in this way, we provide alternatives, and I believe we really help. We act as intercultural mediators, and we provide examples of how people could live their lives in different ways. Now, having said that, there are also practical things that immigrant newcomers, immigrant newcomers can do as immigrant poets. First of all, and I hope you like that, they should go to Shabisher.
Great. Yes, exactly.
Because it's how do you put it, the most diverse poetry reading in Toronto. And I know you welcome immigrants and languages and accents and so on and so on. Now, it means that they should look for writing communities. They should search for, at the public libraries, at universities. They should search for readings and sign up for open mics. They should search for workshops. They should search for poetry books, poetry groups. There are quite a few. And they should, in this way, do their networking. Because networking, I have to admit, after 22 years is very important in Canada. I would say that in our home countries, we had our network in a natural way. They were our former classmates, neighbors, and so on and so on. But when we come here, we had lost those. So we have to recreate a circle of people around us. And we can exchange information, we can learn. They can also do more non-traditional things, like sign up on Facebook and sign up on the Facebook groups that are related to poetry. And I have to tell you that several publication opportunities came my way on Facebook, and I published them. And this was one of them. This is the Soap Book, in which we both have a poem which was dedicated to the hyphenated generation. But they could also, Insta poets are very successful right now. And if they publish in print after they became famous on Instagram, they managed to sell much more books than the so-called print poets. I don't know, read your poems on YouTube. Or on TikTok, but be aware that if you do that, no magazine is going to publish that poem any longer because it is already out there in the media. Also, well, there is a moment when we need to admit if we need to take more English classes. And I am not talking about the accent, because according to my research, the actors can change their accent. Accent comes with us and it's deeply embedded in our brain. But we can always improve a language which is second language or third language to us. And also, I think it's very useful to go to poetry workshops, like when I was attending the Shabisher poetry workshop. It was very helpful to receive feedback from you and everybody else, and maybe even take a creative writing course. It doesn't have to be for credit, but I've been teaching a few creative writing courses, and after teaching them, I felt sorry I didn't think of taking one when I came to Canada, because it's true. We, in my view, immigrants enrich Canada, enrich Canadian culture, enrich Canadian poetry. But I think it's it's realistic and honest to think that we also need to adapt. By immigrating as writers, we change our readership.
Exactly.
So we need to get our message across. So we have to keep what's culturally and personally specific, but also we have to find a way to be heard, likely to be understood more than heard. So yeah, this would be my two pence advice about.
Oh, that's awesome. Exactly. That's true. I think all the pieces of advice, a lot of them I've written about as well in different pieces and talked about. So we share this experience because, to be honest, nobody else can tell an immigrant's story. Only an immigrant can do that. But in order to do that, they have to have the linguistic ability to do that, and the cultural fluency that comes with it. Yeah, that's awesome.
We are like, you know, I don't know about you, but I know that sometimes I am thinking in Romanian, even though in the last 5 years or so, I surprise myself talking to myself in English. But translation goes beyond language, you know. We need to learn to translate cultural experiences for a different target audience. And because I mentioned that, and I know you also do that, I would also encourage immigrant poets to translate. I am not talking about self-translations, because these are frowned everywhere, but I am talking about translating writers from their home countries. And this is another beautiful way of acting as a intercultural mediator. And it's also a practical way of getting our names out there. For some reason, it seems much easier to publish translations than to publish original work. Because in all fairness, I have to admit that ARC magazine did publish in 2019 my translations of poems by Nora Yuga, who is one of the
awesome.
Most,
awesome. But I think it all depends, you know. For example, I find that when I translate Sufi poetry, it's harder to accept as a translation because it comes from a totally different cultural experience that is not appreciated. It brings with it the religious, the scent and everything else, and adds a whole other layer to it. But yeah, I mean, depends on the culture to culture. Probably, you know, it works in some cases and doesn't work in some. But I try. I've published those as well. So
congratulations. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I guess this is all the time that we have right now. So I just want to take this opportunity to again thank you for accepting this invitation and sharing your wisdom and insight and experience with us. We're really grateful. Thank you very much.
Thank you again for inviting me and for being such an amazing host and asking me such interesting questions. It's been very interesting to reflect on those topics. Thank you, Bänoo, and thank you, Muse Arts.
Thank you. We continue tonight's event with Manole Bandukwala, who is a writer and visual artist. She's currently coordinating editor for Arc Poetry magazine and digital content editor for Cantius. She's a member of Ottawa-based writing collective 7. Her collaborative chapbook with Conyer Clayton, Sproul, The Time It Took Us to Forget, was shortlisted for the B.B. Nicol Award. Her debut poetry collection is forthcoming with Brit Books in 2020, this year. See her work at Bandukwala.com.
Hi, my name is Manole Bandukwala, and I'm looking forward to reading for Happening Multicultural. I'm going to start by reading 2 poems from a recent collaborative chapbook that I wrote with a writing collective called 7. The chapbook is called Holy Disorder of Being, and it's one long continuous sequence. This is from Holy Disorder of Being. Rippled, i.e. the pond and all its fish. It dried up one day. Someone left the sun on for too long. Grass is just another word for skin. Keeps so many memories from spilling. Now ripped. All those fish flopping onto the paved patio. How the sun shone at midnight, as though the latitude changed. The earth is not absolute. It fissures, leaving pools of sky and bone. The middle distance. 1,000 yards stare off into space, spacing, comet caught, crushed black iris, dense, like you're deepening. Forehead fault lines, flashes, bursts across the sky, fungi in the undergrowth. Gently brush my lips, there. A kernel, ready to pop. Snakes slither, find homes, curling rock crevices. Your hand searches for their veined eggs. A heart storm, through a sense of unbeing, my soul's monsoon, as it's plucked. I burn through my well of hopes, soft like rays of mid-autumn moon. Free thighs, limits denuded. And now I'm going to share a selection of some other poems. This first one's called Letter to My Great Grandchild, and it was recently shortlisted for the CV2 Foster Poetry Prize. I have yet to sweep out the dust from behind my bed. When I do, I find a ball of socks fallen back there with brittle hair. I toss the socks in the laundry bin. There are sheets and delicates and towels yet to wash. There are future children, future pet dogs, future horses roaming a single level house, just slightly up the country road. The friend who lives across an ocean has yet to show me Edinburgh's castles. The neighbour promised chili peppers from next summer's yield. 3 generations down is a great-grandchild who holds my wrinkled finger in its tiny clutch, and I coo at how marvellous life can be. Tomorrow, we'll celebrate my partner's 100th birthday with a cake of fresh air. Today, I swerve around dead city critters. Squirrels, chipmunks, and skunks who weren't ready to die either. I slow down when raccoons run past, causing a pileup of cars behind me and damaging the bumpers and taillights. But at least we're all alive. The raccoon, too, as it scampers down the neighbor's trellis and digs out the pepper seeds. Neither I nor the neighbor will know till next year yields only wilting flowers. Sometimes a prophet needs a woman to survive. They are names, but also flowers, but also people, and in one case, an entity. Everyone envisions their own version. The version's usually a man, usually bearded, usually white. We are not white now, nor did we start this way, but this is where our flowers wilt. Smell periwinkles and think, this one smells like Fatima, daughter of hibiscus, blooms outside merchant shop, sat on her father's lap while he laughed and recited the newest revelation. A touch on his beard, she could feel God's pulse, and God could not be described as everyone thought then and thinks now. There is no gender, nor beard, nor skin, just God. Fatima's mother is dried lavender, bloomed and dried and bloomed again. A flower takes a new life, shape of a blanket or basket. Desert husk flickers. Whiff a caravan at sunrise, call out, Khadija, flavor the story. Yes, I need to hear Cave Hera's echoes from your mouth. Her husband shakes in her arms. She rocks him into prophethood, takes the rainfall when she goes. This next one is called A Place Where Everyone and No One at All Lives, or Love Poem with Fruit. It's been a while since I wrote a poem about identity, but I would rather wrap a scepter with love poems, paper mache a throne with love poems, etch bricks with love poems, and build a palace and pave its courtyard with love poems. In the middle of the courtyard, in the middle of the desert, a mountain gushes. Close eyes and throw in a coin. Hazy love glimmers on the water. The love poems would have mangoes, summer harvest and piles around the kitchen pantry. A single word etched into each mango skin over and over again. Inscriptions in sun gold. Coconut shells dried out, collecting yesterday's sighs. Language figured as sharing, not learning, and beneath this palace foundation, some lost, hovering identity. Wearing each history like a love poem, meet out behind the jasmine vines, perfumed, ready for lunch with lychees laid out spelling love, like all fruits do, wherever they may grow. And all of us here, spreading identity across the pavement, translucent vellum blanket laid over. And I'm just going to close with one more poem, a ghazal, for my friend Isabella Wong. We're all creatures in the end, towering like sunflowers, calling to the sun, sea of golden faces in rows of sunflowers. This pebble, compass round, covered with a thin speckle of dirt, a perfect inner hold to the yellow petals of sunflowers. Watch the sky tonight. The moon is moving in for an eclipse. An astrolabe in spring, all its dials pointing out the sun, flowers. Everything is shifting, the space between me and my beloveds. So treasure the moments of being, even if it is only some hours. Have you heard the wind today? All the tallest fell around. If it were not the turn of winter, so would have the sunflowers. There is one way to portal through space, to swing across the stretched fabric of time and land in a field of sunflowers. Though there are no oceans in between, there is still water, and towards you I float love, buried within these sunflowers. Thank you so much.
Before I introduce the last poet of tonight and the last poet participating in the happening Multicultural Festival 2022, I would like to draw your attention to one point. And that is that the biographies that I am reading have been written by the poets themselves. So I'm introducing the phenomenal Fan Wu, who describes himself in these words. Fan Wu is a delirious pedagogue and melodramatic poet who lives between Toronto and Kingston. You can find his work online at Mice Magazine, Shrapnel Magazine, and C Magazine.
Lady, Afternoon, Dogs, Keeper. A poem in 4 parts. Lady. A woman walks the winter street with a hearse for a baby carriage. No baby inside, nor dachshund, nor schnauzer. Later it all begins to sag. Flesh drips, want folds, but the hair stays stiff, like the soul is proud of its age. Hypercompression of the memory cone. SpongeBob Popsicle recirculates as a nostalgic punchline. She flips a ghoulish grin at me, steers the stroller straight onto the middle of the Kingston Street, which reminds me to die my own death, to do it my own way. Belladonna's belly's bruised. Here's to feeling good. Here's to feeling bad. Afternoon. The limit goes down further than that. He sits his beloved down to say that he has a premonition of his own death. The theory goes that every single star in the sky reflects in its essence one singular herb on Earth. When his grandfather was dying of dementia, he would sweep the road that led out from his brick house. His beloved listens soundlessly, though neither the sway of the trees outside, with their limbs leaning in through the windows, nor the mud indoors suggests impatience. If 2 men touch, it is not by skin, but by semblance. Let me begin again. 2 men are sitting at the bottom right corner of the frame. The more talkative man says, "Our relationship is hard to understand or define. We have so much between us that I can't ever begin to talk about in this lifetime. Is it you who puts up with me or me who puts up with you? The two men trawl a whole life, lived together, often in silence, or else in tantrum. Their naked feet in strapped slippers swing up and down, and loudly broadcast the undercurrents of the unconscious. If you pose the question of eternity, perhaps the sex question fades out. Man is a creature who builds bridges from illumination to illumination, while cobwebs accrue mindlessly behind. My acupuncturist tells me to cut lactose from my diet. In a soggy voice, I admit to having binged cheese strings. An open palm, an awoken lake. Our bodies draw taut the line of time, vivisected as if the Vitruvian man were forced into fetal position. The Value Village graphic tee spoke to me and said, "Welcome to Ontario, home of biker harassment." I can't focus. My mind lolls open like an unbrushed tongue. Do you want to meet me in your next life? At the end of days, there is the image of a man walking down Taipei streets, his head bowed, his body shrouded in a red cloak. The slope of his shoulders suggests illness, the type of illness that comes from the psyche before it happens to the body. How is it possible that the human is the originator of history, and simultaneously a kind of species constructed by history? In Taipei, you gorge yourself on skewered meats as the sky passes over from emerald green to gray to gray. The last light left on in the Marquis de Sade's castle is a one-room private casino. Some of us are too self-aware to be actors. For the rest of us, experience passes us by like a bad wind we'd rather escort out the window. Cruelty, according to Artaud, is the very fact of some poor scrap of life becoming distinct from the ground of nothingness from which we all do spring. Life goes on, albeit with a sense of helplessness. The world is an illusion. Oh, gone, gone, gone beyond, gone fully beyond. Awakened, so be it. Elsewhere, elsewhere, into that elsewhere wholeheartedly. Enlightenment. It is as it is. Gatte, gatte, paragatte, parasamgatte, bodhi svaha. Chant it 128 times and 129 after I die. No true peace between nations until tranquility sits in the hearts of men. He already had Buddha in his mind, but of course it's always good to have someone else. Part 3. Dogs. Cross-currents, a grisly flux. A change in humidity reminds you of fatherhood. Time past is the accumulated crush of all present moments that became back then as soon as they are now. He stands in the whipping monsoon winds, gets knocked around, raises a sign saying, "This life for rent." Every action plays out to its completion. That's as good a definition of nature as I think I'll ever muster. Pisses in the reeds, with the head of his peen poking out. My roommate bought White Rabbit popsicles. You know that brand of milk candy that's wrapped in rice paper? It's Pisces season, but the tiger's pawing at the fishbowl. At the age of 30, my deeds are nothing but dust. 30 years later, I still sit on my toilet, ripe with indigestion and memory, my body on the bleachers while boys play. Neither treasure nor trouble, not by a Chinese mile. Mosquito net, urinal, childhood as a series of incremental regressions. How the hubbub of the Chinese supermarket brings up a chain of filial failure and malcontent. He eats the whole chicken before even touching the rice, which is mostly white but for a bit of curry sauce along the sides of the pile. The order of eating protein versus carbs on your plate says a lot about someone you love. So do the dogs, the strays. A list of things I let expire in the fridge. Cucumbers, ajvar, raspberries, hummus, oranges, an open can of Campbell's soup, juice, oat milk, almond milk, bread, rarely meat, and never sausages. Petal warble. What kind of soul discloses? Pebble ready and a rock to share. I'm so fucking lonely in Kingston, in the basement of the retired senior homo who has children. But in Kingston, stray dogs make sense. Yellow noodle curtains, thick grocery plastic, dusted with stacked handprints. Premonition of a butcher's blade hovers in midair. A little star, in whom I entrusted all away. A dry of love lately, like a crust of sourdough left in front of a space heater. I turn my wrists around 300 times a day for how stiff they are. Love you do over the phone like it's the most natural thing. Lachrymosal enough to eat the whole cabbage, red lipstick painted over top of it, in the facsimile of a face. The way men's screams ricochet through my body like dueling spines and my bound hands reach out to touch their burnt hair. At the banya, feeling bereft, feeling blue, huffing steam with meat for teeth, Venic lash, cold lip, fish bake, fresh snow. Art is a skeleton key for a variable geometry of internal emptiness. Art asks the question, why won't Daddy blow out the birthday candles? I'm a finely marbled one-man massage machine. Geriatric in my capacity for adaptation, I stand behind life unblinking, ready to mistake watery eyes for tears at the first sign of a sliver of intimacy. Snow again, to my chagrin. I can't believe I have to teach Captain America in the context of queer theory. Rescued from the hunger tides, only to be pulled into the tides of war. I'm trying to transcribe the immediacy of life, most of all when it's only dredges. Badminton paddle, boat blown by tempest, 3 women recede. Tell me honestly if you need my help feeding the kids, as with the dogs. And an animal tide goes surging away. Part 4, Keeper. Light the tiger fire. Fly swatter in swatches of blue. The eye pulls back to watch the dead, to watch over. Bluebell, blue vague, lily of a stomped tongue. The joss paper landed on my head as ashes after I burned it, invoked a few ancestors, and went along with my day, or what of it was left. I wish you a good nightly sleep and sound dreams, a safe life.
This brings us to the end of tonight's show. Huge thanks to our poets, to the festival team, Paula Gomez, Paula Sofia Morales, Natalia Rus, Alex Oscuyano, and all the other volunteers working hard behind the scenes. Thank you for joining us. Have a great night.